You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side.
God bless America. Welcome to The Ranch, everybody. The podcast explores the people and happenings of Dry Creek Ranch, Eagle, and the greater Boise area. We are going to get right into it today. My guest was awesome, as always. He is a Board of Education member for West Ada School District. We talked extensively about the levy that's coming up, safety in schools, expansion of the area. All of these things are pressing incredibly on our school district. School district, by the way, which performs phenomenally on a national level. And it's a big piece of what makes this area so fantastic and special for everyone. It is, however, really being stressed, again, by people moving to the area because it's such a great area. So again, we spoke extensively about what's going on with the school district, what they're doing to increase the quality and security, and just maintain the best possible atmosphere for non-politicized, wonderful public education, which I have a great appreciation for. So without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend, David Binetti. So look.
Yeah. So
nobody wanted the school board position pre-2020, and now everybody has opinions about it and they're really engaged, which I think honestly is great, right? More civil engagement is wonderful, but it puts enormous pressure on you. I mean, people I'm sure email you all the time saying like, I want this teacher out, or I have this problem with this soccer program, or what. It's like, listen, we don't get into the weeds on the school board.
Well, sometimes we do. I mean, we try to help wherever we can. And sometimes people just need help navigating the process, right? And there are processes in place. I mean, we are a very large school district. We're the largest in the state of Idaho, and 40,000 students, almost twice the size of our nearest closest at Boise School District. So, like, it's a large enterprise, $500 million budget, managing 58 schools, 382 square miles. So it's big, right? 127th largest district in the country. So people, do need help, and we try to help them navigate through the process. But yeah, at the highest level, the school board is responsible fundamentally for managing all the resources, including the staff. That ultimately means that we hire and fire a superintendent as a practical matter. We're responsible for policy decisions. So setting the policy for the school board and saying, this is how we're going to run our district. And then the third thing is just oversight, right? Making sure that what we've established the policy and the people to run that policy actually do that. Right? Budgetary oversight, policy oversight, things of that nature. And
right.
So it is fairly straightforward, very much like a board of directors for a larger corporation. Very, very analogous in that way. So.
Now, let's be clear. Before we start chatting, you are just speaking as an individual. You're not speaking for the board. You're not speaking for the district.
That's right. I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for the district. I can't speak for the other board members. This is just me.
I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy on a mic. So, look, I got hooked up with you, obviously, because there's a big question about SROs in elementary schools, right? Yeah. Obviously, in the middle school and the high schools,
yes.
We have resource officers, we have some manner of security or presence on campus. And in rare instances, well, not absolutely rare, but in very few instances, we actually have some manner of armed protection on campus if the response time is deemed too far. So if it's like, look, if there's an emergency at a campus and it's going to take 25 minutes reliably to get a police officer here, we need to have something established. But again, that's for the middle and the high schools.
Yes.
We initially, kind of got connected talking about the elementary schools. Now, why is it that at the middle and high school, we have these older students who are capable of, let's say a 16 or 17-year-old, an emergency happens, God forbid. Yeah. 16 and 17-year-olds can kind of fend for themselves. Scatter, they can drive, they can do all kinds of things. But at the elementary school, you have, K to 5. These are the most vulnerable of our student bodies. And we don't have SROs or as school resource officers or things of that nature at those schools. Why is that?
Well, we don't have dedicated one-to-one. Okay. We do have rotations of individual SROs that do work at the elementary school level. And the shortest answer is simply you can't hire the people. They're simply not available. And it's more than anything else a supply issue in terms of supply of the potential officers that are talented to do that particular job, willing to do that particular job, and being able to hire them at a rate that is, possible within, your budgets. So that's actually far and away the single most important constraint that we have, is that you just simply can't hire the people.
So. Now, is it you can't hire them because you only have $27.50 for an annual budget dedicated to them, or is it that the police departments or body that's in charge of training and distributing these people literally is like, look, we don't have anyone we can spare?
It's literally we don't have people that are actually there, I think, looking for that job, right? Because you also have to keep in mind that the people that go into law enforcement have a particular mindset for the job that they're looking to do, right? And the SROs are very talented individuals, and they can help with a lot of school-related things that are particularly acute at the middle and high school level, right? They can do more of the SRO job as opposed to a beat cop, right?
Right.
And a lot of those things are not necessarily available to elementary schools, or I mean, it can be, but it could be any beat officer that could come in and say, hey, this is my badge, this is what I do, as opposed to SROs in the middle and high school level, which have very specific skill sets interfacing with students who might be at risk or have other situations, and so they can do a higher level of counseling is too strong a word, but think of it in those terms.
You're interfacing more with like a 12 to 18-year-old, which is a distinctly different thing than like flushing out, meth operations and things of that nature, right? Without going too extreme. But I mean, that is a fair point, because interacting and interfacing with somebody or looking for at-risk youth or trying to intervene, before youth become at risk is a completely, like, as you're saying, it's not like counseling, but it's absolutely not beat cop kind of work.
It's very different, and you can find a lot of officers who are interested in that, although they are also rare. Now, let's just be clear, right? I mean, if you were able to spend $1 million per year, you would find people that would be willing to do that job, right? So at the end of the day, everything is always fundamentally an economic decision. That said, there are still rules and restrictions about, what they can be paid and the limits to what they can be paid and so forth. And then we have our own budgetary constraints. But that's not the biggest issue, right? The biggest issue is that you cannot find the people that are able to do the job.
Right.
So it's a constraint.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, secondary security then, right? Because again, this was kind of how we got connected. Secondary security issues. So, you have films over glasses, or you have orientations of desks and cameras and whatnot. The new schools that West Ada is constructing have these safety measures, correct?
Well, not all of them, and it varies from school to school. And, obviously we're not going to get into any discussion on any individual school and what they have, because, you can't invite that.
Right.
You can't invite an action by, indicating where there are security challenges. But yeah, the newer schools had a lot of these things built in, but the older schools had to have them retrofitted. So for instance, key access, we have at all of schools on the campus, throughout the district. And it's just a question of having to retrofit schools that are 50 years old, as opposed to new schools that will have those as just part of their built-in process.
Right. And to be clear, I'm very my students. I have 3 students that go to West Ada schools. Yeah. I'm very pleased with the school. Yeah. My wife and I volunteer almost every single day for something, it's art or reading or math, whatever it is. And again, the security system showing the ID every single day, and the people know us, right? And it's one of those things where I'm like, me, just let me. But then I realize, this is actually really good. Like, it's a really great protocol. Even if you know somebody, hold up the ID, it's getting recorded. We're all on the same page. So again, I'm very pleased with them. But are the schools that don't have the things that the newer schools are being built with, are you checking those off slowly? And like, are they all intended to be upgraded at some?
Of course. Yeah, of course. I mean, look, it's a primary consideration. It's just not the type of thing that you can talk about, because you don't necessarily want to go out and say, we've got to do all these things in the schools. And now you're inviting basically action against places because you're making a suggestion that things are not necessarily where they need to be. I mean, these things are always being looked at, always being worked on, always being determined to what's the best that we can do given what we have and where these places are. So yeah, I mean, it's not anything that's getting swept under the rug. I can assure you that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So bottom line is, it's all slowly getting taken care of. And of course, if you had twice the budget, you could, snap your fingers and everything could be taken care of tomorrow.
So again, with the same thing with like the SROs, not necessarily. Like for some of these products, the vendors are actually backed up, right? Because we're not the only school district that are thinking about these things. And some of these products are relatively new technological advancements, right? And so it's not like you can just go down to Home Depot and buy it, right?
Sure.
Some of them have some fairly long lead times. So, we do everything that we can to make sure that we're in the queue so that when the time is available, we we can move as quickly as the supply is available. But it's very analogous in that sense, right? That it's some of these products are simply not available.
So it sounds like from a lot of the what you're saying, a lot of the upgrades or a lot of the things that just the two security level things we've talked about. You're like, listen, it's not a matter of money. It's a matter of availability, vendors, time frame, interests, all of these things. It's not the primary issue. It doesn't sound like is if we had twice the budget, we would instantaneously fix everything.
So it's not going to instantaneously fix everything. Would we be able to move some of those things forward? Yeah, I suppose that's true. Again, I'm not detailed in terms of the operational aspects of like how long is a PO and all that sort of thing. At the end of the day, everything, of course, relates to economics, so you cannot discount that. But it's not as primary and obvious as, we want to buy some textbooks, right? If we had more money, we could buy more textbooks. Or if we had more money, we could buy more computers, right? I mean, these are things that are readily available in quantities, whatever quantity you need. Some of these other things take a little bit longer, and particularly ones that require any type of installation with professional installation management. Particularly construction in the area right now, it's really backed up.
Gotcha.
So it is, money always matters, but it's definitely more than money.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the levy then, help me understand the levy because you are asking the community for more money, and people are gonna make their opinion known in the voting box, right? Like we're gonna vote on this.
Yeah.
What is the money going towards then? Where are the shortfalls? Because it sounds, Idaho has always been attractive to me.
Yeah.
And I've always been impressed with it because there is actual fiscal responsibility. It's not just like, we should be fiscal. It's like, no, we are fiscally responsible.
Very true.
So talk to me about the broad terms of the levy, and then in your opinion, what it's going towards, what earmarks, all that stuff.
Well, so there's two things. One of them is just how the overall levy structure works. So I'll table that for now, so I can answer your direct question. But it might be useful to get a little bit of background.
Why don't you start wherever you want? We're in no rush.
Let's answer your question.
Great.
I'll get a chance to circle back on that. So the primary thing that we're looking for is to help address the spectacular growth that we've seen in the Treasure Valley. Right, it's been absolutely remarkable, particularly in areas like Star or in below 84 or Zone 2. I represent Zone 4, which is basically everything north of Chinden, up here into Dry Creek, where we're sitting, up to Avamore, and then all the way out to Star, Legacy, those subdivisions, and then down into Two Rivers, Island Woods, and some of those areas that are sort of north of Chinden. And the entire area has seen absolutely spectacular growth, and some of this was good growth for planning. For instance, the Waihi High School was a bond that was approved in 2017, so that a lot of the issues that we would otherwise have had on the high school level have been addressed because we've got this school there that's able to take that excess. And if we don't start addressing some of those growth issues now, we're going to see then a downgrade in terms of the overall education performance, I believe. We're doing really well right now in terms of our performance, right? Not only being the top of the state of Idaho, but also nationally, we're doing really, really well. That eventually will suffer if we have kids that are going to take their classrooms in a hallway or in a teacher's lounge or in a library as opposed to a dedicated classroom. That's not happening yet, but it's something that we can look at the demographics and say is going to happen if we don't get ahead of this. So that's the primary reason that we're looking to the community to say, okay, hey, look, we need to support these activities because we don't have the facilities in some cases, or the facilities that we have are antiquated and they need to be upgraded. And it's mostly about functioning, expanding so that we can actually do the job of teaching, which is what we're really focused in on here, right? That's our goal. That's our obligation. We're here to educate. We're sticking to the basics. We're focused on that. We're not putting anything else in the equation. But to be able to do that, we have to have teachers willing to teach in facilities that they're willing to teach in, right? Because we can't compete on a salary basis with, for instance, the Boise School District, which of course is our neighbor, because they have a very special. They predate the state. And so they operate under a set of rules that allow them to effectively impose whatever they need to increase their resources.
They can impose that.
Yeah, which is very different than of course those of us who have to operate under the state rules. And so it's just apples and oranges. It's very different. But we've learned it through time that the West Data experience that we provide to our educators, which ultimately is your teaching is really tied to the people that you can hire.
Sure.
Is very different. Even though they could make more in other locations, they tend to like teaching here because of our culture, our values, and to a certain degree the facilities that we have that are pretty even keel. So
okay. So the expansion or upgrading of facilities. So you're literally talking about, look, we need the levy money to build more buildings. We need the levy money to expand or improve the existing buildings.
That's right.
Because for instance, one elementary school that my kids go to, the elementary school my kids go to, the kindergarten class.
Yeah.
One of my students was going into kindergarten, and they had 3 classes initially, and they had to last minute add a 4th kindergarten class. Yeah. Now, this kindergarten class had to be in a different wing of the school because they were already filled up in the kindergarten wing. So the kindergarten class my kindergartner goes to is actually right next to it's like 2 classrooms down from my 5th grader. Yeah. Right? So again, they're making ends meet. And by the way, love the class, love the teacher, love the administration. They're fantastic. But I can see what you're saying, which is, hey, we kind of scrambled last minute within the last month before school opened to get this new class set up. And by the way, the class is full. Mm-hmm. It's not like they only had 10 students. It's at capacity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the primary issue you guys are going for.
That's the most pressing issue that we have. So now I'll circle back and sort of explain the sort of how the school resources are assigned. So there's 2 broad areas. And one what I'll call operations. And when I say operations, I mean things like the day-to-day business of doing the school. Textbooks, pencils, paper, electricity, transportation, the teachers, the custodians. That's all the things that are sort of operationally focused, right? So whatever you spend, that you spend it and then it goes out and it's gone, right? It's if you were thinking in a business context, the stuff that goes on the profit and loss statement, on the income statement. And then there's the second area, which is the things that go on the balance sheet, right? So your assets, right? And those are your buildings, any capital infrastructure, any expansions, things that you would amortize, the things that you spend money on that are the buildings themselves that we call plants and facilities, right? And so when you look at those 2 broad areas, I'll deal with the things that we're not discussing, which are the operational levies, 2 of which are, one is called the emergency levy, and then the second is called the supplemental levy. The majority of operations are funded by the state of Idaho. That's through some history I won't get into now, but it's basically the state of Idaho is meant to fund operations of your schools. So your teacher's salary, all that. There's something called the funding formula. It's budgeted at the state level. It's dispersed through all the districts throughout the state. Some would say not terribly efficiently, but as it is, that's where the bulk of the money comes from. So then as a local community, you can decide to do one of 2 things, one of which is called an emergency levy. The second is called the supplemental levy. These go to operations, pencils, teacher salaries, whatever you need.
Not plants and facilities.
Not plants and facilities. So when you have an emergency levy, what basically the state constitution says is, okay, if you have hypergrowth, if you have growth like we've experienced, you as a board can just impose a levy on an emergency basis, right? So you can say, okay, it's not going to the voters. You just put it into place because you need to, and you need to move quickly. So we have experienced tremendous growth, but we had an opportunity to impose an emergency levy earlier in the year. And as a board, we declined. We said, nope, we're okay on the operations side. Yes, of course, we'd love to pay our teachers more. Yes, it's not as ideal as it could be, but we're not going to do that. The second thing is the supplemental levy that can be renewed every 2 years. And that supplemental levy, again, only goes to operations. And it says, okay, we need a certain amount of money to do whatever X is, goes into the general fund. Our current is at $16 million, and that was just reinstituted in 2022. And will come up for renewal this year if we decide that we're going to do it. My personal opinion, and I'm on record as saying I'm not going to be supportive of a new supplemental levy, because again, I think that operationally we can make it work with what we have as a district operationally, and the fundamental bargain that we have with the state is you guys need to focus on this. This is what you took. This is the responsibility that you have. We're not going to then ask the voters in our districts again to pay it because you shortfalled us on that. So thankfully, they've just gone through some of these negotiations. We understand that a lot of these things are going to be increased, including teacher salaries, which is really important. We just as a district don't feel that it's important to, I as a trustee don't feel that it's a useful thing to have these supplementals that then become part of your budget, because then people just assume that you have to do it. Otherwise, what? Are you going to let teachers go? Or are you going to cut teachers' salary?
Which I think a lot of people move. You're talking about hypergrowth, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people moving from other states. I'll speak to California.
Sure.
You see this crisis all the time. It's like, okay, we've already. I had a conversation on an old podcast in 2020 with the president of the teachers union, and they were trying to pass this thing, Prop 15, I believe it was. Okay. And she tells me on the show, I couldn't believe it. She said, "Look, we've already budgeted the money, so this thing better pass."
Yes.
And I was like, do you think that's responsible? Like, you've already budgeted and planned for this. And she's like, we wrote the budget assuming, and it didn't pass. And then it was, we're going to have to lay off the counselors. We're going to, like, you didn't vote for the students. And it was all this, shame and whatever. So yeah, I agree with you. That's a terrible way to keep functioning, where you have to keep instilling a sense of urgency and crisis.
Extortion is a terrible business strategy. So yeah, we're not. I personally am not in favor of extortion.
Right.
And look, I mean, I think that will it have some impacts? Yeah, there's trade-offs. There's always trade-offs, right? And that's how you have to intelligently make decisions. There's no one of the people that I idolize is Thomas Sowell, the Hoover Institution, and one of his famous quotes is, "There are no magic answers. There are only trade-offs." So you have to make a decision based upon the resources that you have, and then there's going to be trade-offs, and that's fine. That's the adult way that you do it.
Right.
So anyway, so that's my personal perspective on that. So, but that's all operations. It doesn't mean that we clearly want to pay teachers more. But when you actually look at it, we are spending approximately $5,100 per student, which is, depending on how you measure, 49th or 50th in terms of all the states in terms of per student funding. And yet we have top 10 academic results. We're 5 points ahead of the national averages on all the measures, where most districts have yet to reach their pre-COVID levels, right? So compare this to something like Los Angeles School District that spends $25,000 per student for results that are on the bottom quintile. Look, I mean, the value that we're returning per dollar spent is absolutely extraordinary.
And it very much betrays the general, or excuse me, the overall sentiment towards Idaho education. Mm-hmm. I have been nothing but impressed.
It is really impressive. It really is, yeah. And not only that, but also the strong focus that we also have as a particular district on the what we call CTE, career technical education portion of it, right? Where we not only prepare students for college if they wish to go, but also for jobs like plumbing, electrician, beautician, childcare, nursing. College is not necessarily for everybody, and particularly now, you'll see electricians that'll earn anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 per year coming out of high school. Well, you can make a wonderful life on that, right?
You can, and I think it's another beautiful thing about the community. Yeah. You have real integration. You have tons of people in this community, neighbors of mine that I know that didn't go to college, lived a wonderful life, are these great pillars of the community. Yeah. And I think a lot of people get pigeoned, or at least, let's say from California, where I was moving from, you got a lot of people in the community that really got kind of pigeonholed in this idea that, okay, look, it's college or bust. Yeah. Like there's no, and what was worse is every student at the high school was not fit for college. You had a lot of people going off and just going because, one, they wanted to leave their parents, but two, they had no idea what they were doing, and they end up getting these junk degrees and spending $200,000 in the process. So the technical aspect of it, especially at the, again, high school level, where you have like 3 pages of different electives with real practical value there. It's like, gosh, that's wonderful. Yeah. So you mentioned that the 2 things we were talking about are not things you're going for. So
that's
the
correct.
emergency levy, you guys had
background.
You had the nuclear option, and you guys elected as a board to not hit it.
That's correct.
Then you also had the supplemental, which you personally are not in favor of.
Yeah. There's one currently in place. It would need to be renewed. So that's something, and for these things to happen, the board has to decide to put it on the ballot. Then the voters have to decide ultimately. But it's my belief that I don't think we need to have a supplemental, and we'll have to tighten our belt a little bit. But I think that that's that section, that sort of operational section, right? The arrangement that we have, the way that it's supposed to work, is that the state is supposed to handle that. And my perspective is that don't have us clean up after another person's mess.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, again, it's extortion. You're having the sword of Damocles hanging over everybody's head. It's like, oh, you better do it or else.
Right.
No way to run a business, a school district, anything. No way to run anything. As opposed to the other side, which is now what we're talking about, which is the asset side of it, the plants and the facilities, the physical schools expansions.
The bricks and the
bricks and the
roofs.
mortar.
Yeah, there you go.
So for that, there are two ways to go. One of them is a bond, and so a bond is just very akin to a mortgage. You have it authorized at the board level, then the voters vote on it. If they decide that it passes, then the school district says, okay, we can now go out and take on this amount of debt. And they will go out to the capital markets and they will raise that amount of debt and they start paying interest on it, whether you use it or not.
Sure.
Just like a mortgage. And then once you pay off the mortgage, you own the asset, right? And in the meantime, there's a sort of joint ownership between you and whoever financed you, right? They have
Sure.
interest in that. And then there's the second, and that's traditionally how most new construction is done, is through bonds. And then you have what's called plant facilities levy, which we should shorthand as PFL, just moving forward. And the PFL is designed to be things that are larger sort of maintenance level issues, traditionally. So we have to put in a new HVAC system, right? Or we have to do some security improvements, right? Or paint or whatever it is. And these things are not operations, right? They're not pencils, they're not teacher salary, but they're not exactly a new construction. They're just sort of things in the middle that are ongoing maintenance that help maintain things that are on the asset side on the balance sheet. And the thing that's sort of different here that I'll get into briefly is that because of the fiscal stewardship of the district over the past, going back 20 years, but certainly the last 10, we're able to use a PFL, plant facilities levy, for more than just maintenance. We're able to use it in the same way to be able to do new construction up to and including brand new campuses, which is the current plan right now. If this PFL that's on the ballot for May 16th passes, two schools, one up here in the Zone 4 area, in the Star area, and then one in south of 84 in Meridian area. And that's simply because of our fiscal stewardship. There's a way that allows us to be able to use that PFL that will be funded by local financial institutions to build schools utilizing that PFL as part of the backing. And those are the only things that you can do, right? Where the state provides the operational funding through their funding formula, they don't do any of that on the physical plant side. And this is true of like almost every district in the country, right? You have local properties, local assets owned by the local communities that are funded by the local communities.
And then the state brings in the pencils, the teachers, the books, and things of that nature.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So they fill that. And so if we are looking to support our area with new growth and plants and improving the schools, it either has to be a bond or a PFL. And we've chosen the route to go with the PFL because there's just a lot of tremendous advantages about going that particular route.
So both of them are debts. So
Yes.
what
Functionally, yes.
What's the difference?
It's a little bit different. The PFL is kind of like a reverse mortgage, right? So, I could get into the arcane nature of it if you wanted to.
The reverse mortgage.
It's functionally, sort of.
okay.
It's a reverse lease, right?
Right.
Essentially. And what's basically happened is the banks are like saying, okay, look, you're a school district. You're in the function of building schools. We will build you this school. We'll charge you a lease in the meantime, right? Now, typically when you're like, well, you're leasing something, you own it took me a while to wrap my head around this too, by the way. But you own the asset and then you lease it out to somebody else. And that's not exactly what's happening here because we'll pay lease payments until the lease payment term is up, which is approximately 10 years. And then we own the building on top of that. So
they front the money and then you pay the lease.
Effectively.
So it really is like a reverse mortgage, except you're the bank paying, the 80-year-old who owns the condo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow, that's an interesting way of doing
it. It's a very good way of doing it because the most important thing is that you're not paying interest, right? So when you have a mortgage, once you take out that mortgage, you're paying interest whether you use it or not.
Sure.
Right. And so as opposed to the PFL where we're able to put that wherever we need it, when we need it, and that money is only being used for that particular purpose. So there literally is no interest, right? So the equivalent amount of bonded indebtedness would cause the district to pay approximately $250 million right?
Wow.
And that's like literally half our operational budget, right? So, but
And the lease, of course, doesn't even start until the building is functional, right? So let's say you guys went out and got a bond, and then there's lead up time, and obviously employment, contractors, and it takes, what's the average time, like 18 months to build a school or something?
In the best case scenarios.
Okay,
yes.
great. Let's call it 24. So you pass the bond, right? The second you pass the bond, you're paying interest. You're 24 months before paying interest before you even have any benefit of that. Opposed to the PFL, where, hey, I don't pay you $1 until my students are walking through this door.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So and it gives you tremendous flexibility, because you can actually, even if you have those agreements, you can cancel them at any time. Like you literally could walk away from it, as opposed to, again, a mortgage. I started to build a house, then I walk away from the house. I mean, well, okay, that's a foreclosure, but in this particular instance, you have the legal right to be able to walk away and from say, nope, don't want to do it anymore.
So in the event that you guys are anticipating, let's say you guys are anticipating continued growth, which I think is accurate, because this place is awesome.
That's correct.
Great. In the event that something catastrophic happens, and then you have a school site that you have, let's say, a bond measure with, the bondholders don't care at all if you're using it or not. Like you said with the house, nobody cares if you're actually sleeping there. You own that house, you got that mortgage, you're paying it. With a PFL, the school district has the flexibility to say, hey, look, this is not functionally working for us. We need to cut ties with this PFL, with this lease, walk away. And the bank is left, or whoever funded it, is left holding the bag for that. So we are like slick and out. We're just boom.
It's the same fact as not paying your mortgage, but it's something that's actually built into the agreements.
And we didn't front load with like some catastrophic down payment. That's right. Right, 50% or something. That's really functionally very fantastic.
Yeah, it really is. There are several things that have made it possible, some of which are legal cases, right? You have to have banks that are willing to do business. Those banks have to have a lot of trust that you're a district that's growing, that you want the schools, you're going to use the schools, because they're taking an awful risk. Right. But all those things mostly line up, right? And so if the banks are willing, and they are, then we're happy to engage with them on that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it really does give just tremendous flexibility, right?
Okay, so with the PFL, because I know there are a lot of people that that don't believe in giving the school districts any more money. They either feel that it's already fully funded, you should do best, or they don't care. They're like, look, this is not my priority anymore, and you're not getting any of my money. Yeah. Do you have a breakdown of what the money from the PFL will go to? Yeah.
So there's all these are available on the site for the West Data site right now. You can sort of see what the general thing is. But there are two things that I think that are important to sort of recognize about this. The first is that this is a 10-year plan. This is very atypical, right? So most school districts, like the one you were mentioning from California, they're like, I have this desperate need, we're behind, grab the money and patch that hole, and then patch another hole, and they're always playing catch up. And as a consequence, you see these bonds, and the bonds come up every 2 years, every 4 years, right? And it's like you're just always playing catch up.
Yes.
So this is a part of an overall strategic plan. This is a 10-year plan, deliberately, specifically a 10-year plan, where we have laid out what our 10-year vision is for what we're trying to accomplish over the next decade. And we're not going to come back to the voters. This is what we want. This is what we're looking for. It's part of our plan. If it's approved, then we're set. And we're just going to implement a thoughtful, cogent strategy that doesn't have us constantly, playing catch up with whatever that is. So every school has something that will require some attention, right? And some of them are just basically functionally like placeholders, right? Things like we need to do our parking lot, or we need to put on a coat of paint, or whatever those things are. An actual in-depth what needs to happen at every school individually will take place should it pass. Well, I mean, it's going to take place regardless, but the schedule with which these things are addressed will take place much quicker if it passes. And that's a responsibility of something that's called the PFL Advisory Committee. So the PFL Advisory Committee is a committee of 20 parents and community members, mostly. There's, I think, 1 or 2 teachers on it that are also parents. But anyway, and they're going to be looking at all the things that need to happen at the district level and help us guide decisions on terms of sequencing and what should be addressed when. But every campus needs a little love somewhere. Right. Now, of course, the only thing that's not delineating on that for the reasons we started off this conversation, are security, right? So there's a lot of security things that would be implemented. We're just not going to list that on a school by school basis, or even generally, right?
Man, that's such a great point, because the concern that some other parents that I've spoke with, at length before you and I met, were saying, hey, look, they don't want to overtly say that they're these security upgrades, and what a shame, because security is one of those things, especially at elementary schools and whatnot, that almost everybody can get behind. So why don't they just come out and say, hey, we're going to be doing this? But of course, you don't want to say, this school doesn't have cameras, and this school doesn't have this, and this school doesn't have that. And of course, everybody can sit back and say, well, like, come on, security, what are the odds?
Sure.
I mean, look, if your kid's at that school, the odds are high enough.
It doesn't matter about the frequency when the impact is that strong, right? So it may be low frequency, but the impact is immeasurable. Yes. So, but look, I mean, it's not only are you not trying to establish those as targets, you're also like saying, okay, well, like, what if it doesn't pass? Right. Are you now saying we're not going to do any security implements? Right. So again, it's a very difficult thing to tightrope, right? And my background as an entrepreneur, I would always get very nervous in trying to sell the security aspects of whatever your product was, because it's like, at the end of the day, you're just inviting hackers to come and try to break it. Right. So
plus, you're really just, instead of discussing the merits of a plan, you're really just trading off of anxiety. Yeah. And once you go down that road, especially when dealing with parents and children, once cultivating and harnessing anxiety from one side or another side, or using that effectively to get your point across, it's always just a horrible end result. Yeah. Because now everyone's anxious, right? Like, if you get everybody riled up and you grab half of them for your, purpose, your plan, well, then the other half didn't get what they thought was the right thing, and now they're freaked out. It's like, look, everybody calm down. Everything's gonna be all right. One of the things that I find a very important point here is that this money will not be rolled into a general fund outside of schools.
That's right.
Right. And it's not a bait and switch. So I remember in, I think it was 2008, there was a large measure, a bill that was being passed in California where they were trying to fund, it was for the schools, right? It was all for the schools. And it was temporary, of course, temporary. But what you come to find out is, one, they wrote the California budget so that there was a shortfall in the education bucket, right? And they fully funded everything else, like prison guards and everything other people wouldn't vote to elect to tax themselves for. They intentionally made a shortfall in education. So they're like, well, we have a need. So they artificially created a need. And the funding for the schools only was committed to the schools for 2 years. And then it went into the general fund, and they could use it however. And of course, it was only supposed to be a 4-year thing, but of course they needed it again in 2012. So it was a total bait and switch, but it does not appear that that's even possible in this case, right?
Well, so look, money is always fungible. So let's just be honest, right? I mean, if you have one thing coming in another bucket, you can figure out how to spend it in another bucket if that's your motivation. Sure, that's not our motivation, right? So we're very, in my estimation, really, really responsible about these things. I'll give you a concrete example.
Well, if I may, I don't think we're actually talking about the same thing, because you couldn't take a PFL for plants and facilities and then just give it to teachers for salaries,
definitely
right?
Not.
So it's not that fungible, right? Like, there's no risk of, say, the teachers union coming up and being like, you just got $10 million and we want a piece of it, right? Like, it's going to go to brick and mortar and things of that nature.
By law. Yeah. Okay. So that those higher things, and it goes the same way too, right? Well, it's not entirely true. Sometimes general funds can be used for assets, but
sure.
We like to keep those things separately, right? In this particular instance, anything that would go for the PFL or the bond, frankly, we're not doing a bond, but if there were a bond, those are very, very specially done. They cannot go to operations statutorily, right? So
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You're going to give me an example?
Well, yeah. So, like, for instance, we received a huge amount of federal funding during COVID, right? But we knew it, and they were called ESSER, and there was 1 and 2 and 3. But we realized, like, that money is not going to go on forever. Right. So, and there were districts that sort of applied it to salaries, right? And so now you've established
You're
this
not taking that salary down when the funding goes away.
Well, I mean, if you can extort your voters, then maybe you can, right? That's never going to work here. But we also don't want to go that path. It's just it's just wrong. It's not the right answer. So anyway, so we put it to things that were one-time expenses that we needed to upgrade, which is mostly textbooks, right? Because textbooks are actually quite expensive. And so new math textbooks, new ELA textbooks, there's some additional back-end large scale that are more operationally focused. We had computers, so computers were purchased for the district, for all the students in the district. So it was those types of things that, you're still going to have to do down the line. Like you're still going to need to get new textbooks at some point. But we were very smart to say, okay, what are some of the big, expensive, one-time expenses that we can use that funding for, as opposed to things that are going to put us on the hook,
right?
Such as salaries, which you're right, they don't go backwards.
Right. Now, I assume that a portion of your budget every year goes to refresh, like essentially saving for textbooks anyway.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
Because you can't take a $5 million budget line and just swallow that 1 year, right? So you save $1 million over a 5-year period. Yeah. So you guys just got a jump start on getting ahead of, again, not playing catch up, but like, hey, we're going to get ahead of this so that we are well funded for refresh in the coming years.
That's correct. Or if you wanted to in the future consider a supplemental, like I said, that's an appropriate use in my estimation for something like a supplemental, right? Where you're saying, okay, we want to refresh our textbooks or we want to refresh something. You put it to the voters and then the voters are able to use it. And then once it's off, it's off. And it doesn't affect normal day-to-day operations. But we still do our planning for all that stuff, right? Our rainy day funds, so that to make sure that because we're knowing that these textbooks will have a shelf life of roughly a decade, right?
Right.
And so that's what we try to do.
Okay. So without getting into, crisis and gloom and doom.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously every school district, and I don't think West Ada would be any different, is going to make do with what they have.
Sure.
But things would suffer a little bit. So what do you see as the biggest risks if the levy, doesn't come to pass, if people are like, look, sure, I'm not in favor for whatever reason. What are those consequences?
So the growth is going to continue, right? So we're still going to have more students in schools, and we have to find a place to put those students, right? And so you're right. Our teachers are fantastic. They deal with a lot, and they manage a lot. And a lot of these things are already happening right now, right? So for instance, Rocky Mountain High School is at 117% capacity. Eagle High School is at 98% capacity. Mountain View High School is at 108% capacity. The only high school that's not at or near its capacity is Hawaii, but they're at 87, right? And we just opened that school, right? So the growth is continuing, and that is also true for some of the elementary, right? I mean, in Star, where this is particularly acute, right? They've basically used up all their classrooms, and they're now going to have to start considering having classrooms taught in hallways or teacher lounges, right? Or hot classroom switches, where teachers have their desk on a rolling, device, and then they
roll it down.
Yeah.
That would not be the business.
And this is the thing, right? So the teachers, I mean, they will manage, but if you continue to put those burdens, then they're going to try to look around and say, okay, it'd be really nice to have a classroom, and okay, I've got this other school district that's not that far away that's letting me have my own classroom, right? And so eventually, that will start to impact the teaching environment, right? Will it happen instantaneously? Will everything fall apart? No, but the growth is still happening. In the meantime, our existing bonds that we have, funded over the past years, those are all rolling off because we've actually been really good at paying them in advance and refinancing them. So there's 30-year bonds. In some cases, we paid off in less than 10 years, right? Because again, we don't want to pay interest for any longer than we have to.
Right.
So the amount of indebtedness for the entire district right now is at $98 million, and I think in 3 years it's going to be something like less than $30 million, right? On an asset base that I don't even know what it is. It's got to be $1 billion or more, actually, probably, in terms of all the property that we own. And so, how are those new schools going to get paid for? They're going to have to be built at some point, I would assume. But it's possible that, over time, we could just as a community decide that we're going to have zero tax base. We're not going to pay for any new construction or any new growth. And we'll just deal with what we have and manage as best we can. And
but I mean, the school district I came from,
Yeah.
was not great growing up. And we had a bunch of like portable classrooms, right, where they'd essentially get like a trailer and come park it. And you know, you always have these like ridiculous AC units on them and stuff because it was like hot as hell. But you don't. That's not quality, right? The teachers weren't happy with it. You could tell they were kind of like, ugh, in like some like dump truck classroom.
Sure.
And they just wanted to be teaching, you know, math or whatever it was. Yeah. And again, it didn't lead to a better experience for the community. And it's going to, as you keep pointing out, we're going to keep growing. That's it. Like, that's the bottom line. There's nothing that's going to stop people from moving here.
Yep.
Like, the more people that move here, obviously, I keep talking to friends about this. Like, you realize 9 out of 10 people who move here love it, right? They love it. And they're telling people back home, like, oh, it's so great here. And then it's like all of a sudden your friend moves, or you want to move your parents here. You know, I was just talking to my dad recently. I'm like, well, you're getting older. He lives in Anchorage.
Okay.
I'm like, listen, you're in your 70s now. You live in Anchorage. You know, I can't really help you very effectively in Anchorage. You know, think about moving to this area. And I think you see a lot of that, or at least I personally see a lot of it with people that are in their 30s and 40s realizing, hey, this place is affordable. It's wonderful. It's a great place to be. Why leave the parents in, you know, Anchorage, or why leave them in California or somewhere? You know, that their money would go farther here, and it would be a great quality of life and all these things. So again, the place is going to keep growing. Right. And with that, absolutely certain, a large portion of those people will be bringing in school age individuals. I would hate to see the quality of education go down. I've been so impressed with it.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think that our teachers can, look, we're going to persevere as best we can. Right. But the reality is, look, at some point it actually starts to have an impact on our educational environment. And when you really boil it down, this is the way that I think about it. There are people who, for reasons that I respect totally and are entirely valid, that do not believe in public education, right? And if frankly, I got to be honest with you, theoretically, if I could wave a magic wand and have everything go back to, you know, purely private education the way that it was 150, 200 years ago, I actually might even be inclined from the theoretical perspective. But as it currently stands, we do have a public education system, and it serves nearly 40,000 kids in this area. And so if you are going to say, look, we are going to have public education, then I really think that it's important to understand public education done right.
Right.
And we're doing it right. Right. We have among the lowest amount of money spent per student, among the best results, certainly the best results in Idaho. This district in particular is focused solely on the educational aspects. You know, for instance, just last year we had a policy change, removed any political activity in the classrooms.
God bless you, sir.
When, you know, Gadsden
That's
flags,
beautiful.
You know, other political flags that deal with sexuality, all gone. We have 2 flags in the classroom: United States flag, the Idaho state flag, right? Those are the flags that we allow in the classroom.
That's great.
Right? We have other things that are, again, we're not getting distracted by things that are trendy or fashionable. We're focused on that. It's reinforced through our superintendent. All of our policies are really, really well tailored to this, and we're continuing to do even more stuff, right? We have processes to making sure that that the material that are in our libraries and the books that are in our libraries and our classrooms are focused on things that are related to core instruction, right? And we don't go trumpet any of this stuff really big. We're just really quietly going about the business of providing a really, really solid functional education without distractions on that environment at a value of dollar per taxpayer dollar spent. Really smartly doing it, retiring our bonds earlier, having really good solid parity with all of our schools in the same area, focusing in on things that are going to be moving forward. So it's less upon the go-on rate for college. That's still important. We're still going to support that, of course, but adding these CTE programs so that you can get plumbing and electrical and auto repair and HVAC, right, in our schools. And so that to me is public education done right. So I'm hoping that people will recognize that and support that. And if you don't support public education, I get it. I respect it. I truly, really want to make that clear that I think that that's absolutely a valid perspective. But if you're going to say, look, public education is something that's valuable, then we need to serve as a benchmark for the entire country, in my estimation. Because I firmly believe this. In terms of the large-scale school districts, there is no better district in the country for how a district of this size operates. No better. Absolutely. Nobody even comes close. So I'd love to be able to serve as an exemplar for that, of what happens when you actually have a district that focuses on spending money wisely, focusing on the basics, and providing a really quality value education for the taxpayers in the area.
Yeah.
And that's West Ada.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with the school district, San Ramon Valley Unified School District down in California.
Yeah.
They had a day of it was a day of silence where every single flagpole ran up, all kinds of goofy flags. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have activist principals, you have people just touting all kinds of political nonsense in classrooms to, elementary age kids. It's a ridiculous thing. I'm in this hot fight with well, not me personally, but I do a lot of podcasts and
Sure.
exposés on different books that are being assigned to students that are absolutely appalling. And again, such a breath of fresh air to see, hey, that's not our charter.
No,
our charter's math, our charter's science. We're educating. Take me back 150 years. Like, no joke. I'm curious, and this is not a setup.
Yeah.
What was it about private education, either by parents or what that is attractive to you, or more could potentially have an argument for being more attractive than public education?
So look, I think that, and this just is all theoretical, right? But theoretically,
we're definitely not going back 150 years.
Well, yeah.
There we go.
It's when people pay for something directly, they tend to get a more efficient and better result because they're using their own money, right? So when you have public education, or frankly anything that's public, you have a lot of economic situations that come into play, tragedy of commons, a lot of things that come into play, where basically the fundamental disconnect is that you have something that's being delivered for somebody that's actually not directly paying for it. That interjects a whole bunch of inefficiencies in the system. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that could potentially go wrong there, right? And regulatory capture, bureaucracy capture, these are all the types of things that can happen, particularly when things get too big, right? So I think that when possible, I think there are a lot of things that could potentially be privatized. I don't necessarily think that I think that we've crossed the Rubicon in terms of public education, right? My personal belief is that that's something that would be very difficult to undo.
Right.
And so the best thing that you can do if you're in a situation, particularly when you're a trustee and you've engaged the public trust, literally, that you just have to do it the best that you possibly can and can reflect the community the best way that you possibly can, spend their money, because it's their money, it's not yours, spend their money the best way that you possibly can and deliver the best possible results that you can. And they were doing all of that in this school district. So I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, I actually have that concept of you're forced to purchase this thing. I was having this debate with somebody who said, look, it's essentially like having a pizza place. There's a pizza place down where we used to eat called Primo's, okay? Like, listen, Primo's does a great job, and they're fighting for every single customer. Yeah. But if Primo's knew that no matter what, from this day forward, the only pizza I could ever eat was Primo's, no matter what. And by the way, I had to go to Primo's. Yeah. Like, I had to go 3 days a week to Primo's. I guarantee you their pizza would be a little bit worse the next day. Yeah. Right? If they know that I have 5 other pizza places to go to and they have to continue fighting for me indefinitely, then they're going to up their game. The pizza's going to be, they're just incentivized. And it's a difficult thing, though, because obviously we have a degree of, education is mandatory. Mm-hmm. So if we said, okay, look, you keep your money, I'll keep my money, but I'm going to require you spend that money. That's a difficult thing. So then we get into, okay, I'm going to take it through taxation in some manner, and then I'm going to give you a voucher for it. We can't go into the voucher program because that's a basket of vipers, right? Like, there are all kinds of problems with it, but there's no perfect solution. But again, I really appreciate what you're saying, which is, look, we're not going to stop public education. Yeah. The only thing we can do is try to make public education as positive an experience as possible, make it reflect the community, keep it simple, leave all of the nonsense by the wayside, and be, financial stewards, educational stewards, and hammer this as hard as we absolutely possibly can, and perhaps be an example for other people, which, again, I think you guys are.
Yeah, but look, I think there are some districts, whether they're in California or elsewhere, that is what they want to do, and that's fine. Like, I mean, if that's...
No, it's not. It's not fine. That's not fine. Like, you're a math teacher. What are you doing talking to my kid about different flags you're flying on the flagpole? What do you teach them calculus? Just stop talking.
If that's what their community wants, and those are the people that they vote in, and that's the policy, who am I to be able to tell you that's right or that's wrong? I mean, that's the whole essence of local control, right?
Okay, that's fair. I'm not saying we should be telling California what to do.
Right,
But
exactly.
I just think from a principle standpoint, it's like, listen, you went to college to become a math teacher in some capacity. Your individual personal perspective on these things is irrelevant to your job description.
I share that view entirely. But at the end of the day, my perspective is: are we reflecting what the community is looking for? And that's what this community wants. I mean, this community wants people that are focused on that. This community wants people that are actually looking at delivering good value for the money, and we're providing that. So at the end of the day, there's some people who are just going to reflexively say no. Or I have a lot of people that have the same thing. They're historically from California, saying, "Look, I've never voted for a bond in my life. I'm not going to start now." And it's like, well. Like I get it. Like I get it when you were spending $25,000 per student and they came back to you every 2 years and they were doing all the interest and you didn't get the value for the education and you go into the school and everything's falling apart and you're like, I just spent this money on the bond. Like what's going on? I get it, but realize we're doing things differently here.
Right.
And it's working. So are we going to punish what's working? How is that going to generate a response? So that doesn't reconcile to me. Right. So that's why.
Things are different. That's why people moved here, right? There was a fun run recently at the school my boys go to, and it was fantastic. They raised something like $70,000.
Yeah.
It was remarkable. It was really great, and I was very happy to participate in it.
Yeah.
We were volunteering there and stuff. But there were also similar types of things in schools in California. But they would, first off, hire it out to an outside organization that would be harassing the kids, literally almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
These individuals who did not work for the school district, right? They worked for this organization that was putting on this fund. They would go into the classroom. They'd talk to our kids. They had access to our children. These were like kindergartner, first grader. Like, who is this man coming in talking to my 5-year-old?
Yep.
What are you doing? And then, of course, the deal is they had a stated dollar amount that they got guaranteed. The first $25,000 guaranteed went to the school district. And then every dollar over that, they split 50-50.
Sure.
So this organization's making tens of thousands of dollars. My kids are coming home. They're buying them off with these cheap, stupid things that were falling apart from China. We at the beginning of the school year, they said, hey, look, we have this. If everybody pays it was like $671 per student, then we will fully fund all our needs for the year. And as young parents, my wife and I felt compelled. It's like, hey, look, let's do our part. Let's write our $671 check and you send it in, no problem. But literally within 2 weeks, it was like, hey, we have this fun run coming. We're like, but we just, what about that thing we just paid? They're like, oh, no, that's for this fund or the other fund, or not everybody paid that. Right? And what you realize is you had to dole out you had to establish how much money you want to donate at the beginning of the year and then decide where you were going to put it in, because they were never ever going to stop asking you for money. Not at the auction, the fun run, the this, the that, never going to stop you. Yep. And that has not been my experience here.
No. I mean, when you look at how we have typically done bonds, that is basically how we've done it, at least historically in the past. Like you have identified need, you come back and like, okay, we're going to come back every 2 to 4 years or every 2 years.
What I mean is more of hitting up people individually.
Yeah.
Not like, hey, we asked you to pass a bond and then we asked you for the $671 and then we asked you for the fun run and then we asked you for this. And it's like, you have to fund schools. You have to fund progress. You have to fund, growth.
Yeah.
But the distaste we had after leaving that school, because we had to go into the private school district. We're like, we can't handle this. This is insane.
Sure.
After the distaste we had for that, I think, stems from this unending just extortion, essentially, coming back to it. And again, I haven't had that same kind of thing. So,
well, I think so you may feel differently about this. It was your experience, but
sure.
But I think for everybody, it's like, look, was I getting the benefit for that? Like if you felt that you were getting the benefit for the money, if you felt that the money was actually being used usefully, right, and it went to the things that it said, and you could look around and you could see it, you probably would feel differently, right? But there's this element of just every time you're hitting somebody up for these things over and over and over again, you sort of know that, wait a minute, like you're not being smart about this. Like, how do I know? Because you keep using this frantic approach.
How about that? There's a pile of trash in the kindergarten playground area that never gets cleaned up,
Yeah.
right? And you're always talking about how you're unfunded on pensions. You're always talking about the crisis with counselors and how we need more. It's like, well, what are you guys doing? I mean, you are getting money for our students. And again, California has this really weird calculation of how they, different zip codes get different amounts of funding from the state. It's all screwed up. Anyway, the point is, I understand what you're saying, which is, hey, if you see the value, most people don't mind paying money or doing their part to continue that value.
Yeah. People are generally want to be, they understand that the schools will help improve the community, improve the next generation of kids that are going to be filling these jobs and helping support in colleges and so forth. What really drives people crazy is that when they stop listening, right, which we had significant issues on that, even in this district, when people just simply stop listening, you have this sort of disconnect between what the people are saying and what is actually happening.
Right.
Or that if they feel that the money is just being wasted to self-serve that in particular bureaucracy, right? And we know the second piece is, the first piece has been addressed in the sense that we've had huge turnover in the board, right? And then the second piece we know is the case because we're already spending about as little as possibly can be spending. And yet, despite that, we're still getting really, really good results, right? Now, I still think that we need to fund our teachers better. As it currently stands, individual teachers that are coming into this district, literally in this area, cannot live on the wage that we provide as a starting salary. They have to be supported by a spouse or some other mechanism because it doesn't reconcile. That said, as a district, we're saying okay, the state of Idaho, if you want to change your funding, then reduce the property taxes overall, then maybe we can have a little bit more local control, which I think, frankly, most of the people in this area would welcome. That's not how it is. They're taking a substantial amount of funds that are being applied at the state capitol and then are coming back to the schools. Okay, that's where we have to operate. And as West Ada, we need to be as smart as we can in terms of advocating for our teachers and our resources as best that we possibly can. And we're doing that, right? And look, things are not perfect. Things are never perfect. What I have found is that when we do identify things that are concerns, whether it's a teacher who's going against policy, right? If we actually reach out to that teacher, what we generally find is it's just a misunderstanding. And it's just like, oh my gosh, they didn't recognize, or they're just new out of school, they just came from college, and they didn't know that that's not how we do things here, right? And so then something happens. The administration acts. It gets fixed. Right? Which again, if people have that experience, you can't necessarily demand perfection. You can demand accountability. And when people see that, okay, there's a process, we take action, it gets resolved, they feel good. They feel happy. I have a lot of conversations like that where people are very upset by something that they see or hear. Half the time it turns out to not be entirely accurate. But anyway, I have yet to see a situation where when you run it to ground, what you have is somebody that's recalcitrant that's saying, I'm going to do whatever the heck I want, and I don't care what you say or think. That does not happen in this district. It does not. Yeah. So that I feel very confident in.
We've had a couple experiences where we really had to, appeal to the administration of the school because there was a problem. Instantaneous action. Yeah, it's wild. That's typically what we see.
And again, when you come from a place where that was not the case, it gets you really, really mad, really, really quickly. And so, so I think that we're doing things really well in that sense right now. So I'm pretty proud of it.
Well, David, listen, I've taken a lot of your time. Is there anything else you want to hit on? Because I know we've talked about a lot of things. Is there anything that I'm missing or not asking correctly?
No, I think that it's been fantastic. I really appreciate the opportunity. I just want to make sure that everybody is aware that I'm really accessible. I'd love to give out my phone number if I can.
Yeah, please do.
Great. So my phone number is 208-713-4599. That's 208-713-4599.
And you're great with texting, by the way, too.
So any constituent that wants to talk at, whatever, you can call or text me anytime. I really want to be, again, to that concept of accountability and accessibility. Sure. I really want to be as open to people as possible. And the answer that I give you may not be one that you like, but it will be the truth. It'll be as best as I can tell you. But I found that everybody's really wonderful. We're all looking for the same thing. We're all looking for the best schools for our kids and the best experience. To the extent that I can encourage people, I would love to say, try to put aside the reflexive reaction of, I don't support this, they have enough money. That may be true. Like, you can make your own judgment on that. But when you really start to look into it and realize the value that we're delivering, the academic performance that we're providing, the CTE and occupational opportunities that we're presenting to our students, and doing that all in a responsive manner that uses this PFL in the most financially conservative and the most financially sound way to provide the best value in flexibility over a 10-year period, and not coming back to the population every 2 years with an extortion, but an actual need that is going to be fulfilled. If people trust us on that, and I can appreciate a lot of people don't necessarily have that trust, right? And I get it, and I appreciate that. But if they do have that trust, then I think our students are going to benefit tremendously for it. So I do hope that on May 17th, we're waking up and we're seeing that the public did agree that these facilities are important, they're needed, they will help benefit the education of our students in West State, and we can keep doing what we're doing, which is providing the best education and nothing more.
Right. And again, to one of the points, which is, hey, you have enough money. It's like, fine, let's say I have enough money today.
Sure.
Let's say I have enough money next week. Yeah. But there will come a time when I don't have enough money to continue delivering this education, because as we grow, we're going to need more rooms. You just need more classrooms. You need more gyms. You need more stuff, right? That's it. And unless you get ahead of it, then you're constantly playing catch up. It becomes this crisis extortion thing, because at some point people will be screaming out about the quality of education and having gone down. And look, who wants to get to that point?
And we are, when you actually look at it, we're already, when you look at all the rest of the districts in the Treasure Valley, and the administration doesn't necessarily like to highlight this because it, kind of makes a little bit of our neighbors feel bad. That's not my intention, but we're the lowest. We're at the bottom, right? 102. Boise is 322. Right, they're more than 3 times in terms of the property tax assessment that we do, right? And I challenge you to go through those schools and then come through our schools and see who's done a better job with the money, right? And that's not to downgrade, that's not to throw anybody under the bus, but we are literally paying a third of our next door neighbor. That's pretty good, right? And we're at the bottom of everybody else. Valley Call look at everybody, right? And even if we do see that tax base expand, we have these other bonds that are now rolling off in the next 2 years, right? So there will literally be just one bond instrument that will exist in the entire district. So this is definitely the time. Because all these other obligations are falling off, and then we ladder it up with this, which is much smarter because we're not paying interest on it.
Right.
And then we'll have a situation where we'll have absolutely no embonded debt whatsoever and total flexibility, paying no interest with brand new facilities. I mean,
that's pretty great. And you said the total debt once in 2 years is going to be like $30 million.
Yeah, I think,
on a nearly $1 billion portfolio.
Yeah, I think if you that billion, I'm just guessing, but you have to look at the all the structures that we have.
It's essentially like at least a factor.
All the
of
value
10.
of the land, all the value of the buildings,
sure.
Right? I mean, they're assets. You could, if you wanted to, you could sell them, right? And that's why I really feel differently about levies and assessments that are meant to expand the balance sheet, right? As opposed to ones that are operations, right? Operations, you got to be really, really tight, because when they're gone, right? There's nothing you can do. You cannot recoup a salary. You can't recoup the paper. You can't recoup the pencils.
Right.
Like those are operational.
They're
expense.
consumable.
They're consumable once they're done, right? You have a school and building, it's actually going to appreciate in value, right? And that's true of the land, certainly the land that's underneath it. You have to buy the land underneath, you have to buy the facility. Now, there's operational maintenance costs, of course, amortization, all those things. But fundamentally, those things are mostly going to accrete in value as opposed to be consumed and gone. So that's why when you're looking at it from that perspective, those types of places you can say, okay, hey, let's be smart about it. Let's retire our debt sooner than later. Let's try to refinance when necessary, which are all tactics and techniques that we've done that allow us to take this PFL approach to fund new construction, because it's not available to all districts because they don't run their finances the same way we do. So the banks are not willing to do it with them. Statutorily, they're not allowed to. You have to have certain levels of asset to debt ratio. We're totally ahead of that game. And if you don't have that, or if you have situations where you do need a supplemental to continue to fund your operations, they're like, well, where's that money going to go? And so they get a little bit skittish. But again, for us, because we've been so financially responsible, they're like, oh yeah, no problem. Right? We're getting multiple banks that are all competing for the business, right? So we'll get the best rates that we possibly can too on top of it. So it just feels good. Public education done right.
Man, I feel good about school district.
It's
good.
We're doing what we can.
Yeah.
It is it's a volunteer job.
Right.
It's a labor of love. It is a labor, but it's totally fulfilling because there's nothing that we wouldn't do for our kids. And I'm sure you can appreciate that.
Yeah, I do, and I appreciate you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for coming in. And,
my pleasure.
Hopefully we have good news in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Quick shout out to our sponsor, C Squared Social. C Squared Social is the leading expert in social media marketing and creative marketing. They have fantastic platforms. I have been a client of theirs for some time. I cannot recommend them highly enough. C Squared Social for all of your social media and creative marketing needs.
Can you still recall